Hey, greetings. It's Fred in Alaska. Thanks for joining me. Early in the morning, getting ready to run some errands. Anyway, that's irrelevant. So, first off, I had a request to wish Miss Debbie in Indiana a happy birthday today. From what her daughter said, she's a big fan of the channel. I want to thank you for your support, Debbie, and hey, happy birthday. Let's see. What I wanted to share with you today? Forgive me, I'm a little tired. Background stuff is a little overwhelming, but what I wanted to share with you today comes from Michael and Courtney. Now, last year, they came up. They lived in Idaho. They recently moved to Montana, and they loved the outdoors. They loved it a lot. And one of their friends up here told them about the Knik Glacier and how beautiful it is, and there's plenty of hiking and all that. So they did what they had to do to make a trip up here. And their friends unfortunately weren't going to be in the state at that time because they were going out of state for a vacation, and they were here early last June, and so they ended up staying out at the lodge. Right? They were out there, and so being without a tour guide or without anyone, locally who really knew the good places to go, they made their own accord. They did their own thing. So right near the lodge is Hunters Creek. Now, Hunters Creek runs south from the Knik River between the glacier and the highway and stuff. And it runs south and it cuts and carves back up in between two mountains, right? Beautiful country, my goodness. But Hunters Creek can be pretty rapid river, heavy rainfalls and stuff. That could be washout. It's not for the meek, And because Michael and Courtney had plenty of experience, it was calm day. It hadn't been raining for about a week, and so they jumped on it. They go up Hunters Creek. They started their journey. It would be to the east side of the creek, going on up through the brush and all that. Now, it was a beautiful day is how it started out. For the first, he said 3 hours or so, because they were doing bushwhacking. They were dealing with mosquitoes. They were dealing with weird sounds they were hearing, but they assumed it was okay. A bear or some other Alaskan wildlife was sensing them, winding them, whatever, and clearing out. So, so far so good. They had some bear spray, and they had a single small 2-man tent, and they had their survival stuff, as they call it, as far as freeze-dried meals, little Bunsen burner type stove, whatever. They were ready to potentially spend a night out there, and they were really feeling great. It was awesome. And then once they get back to the point of the creek, and I'll show it on the map. There's a split. The valley looks like it continues on up, but it's very short distance. But Hunters Creek banks off when you're facing south. It banks off to the left and carves back up through. And if you look at the mapping, you could see, there's a lot of gravel and stuff in through there. Now, again, it wasn't for the meek. They were really earning this. You know what I mean? The brush was dense, dealing with the mosquitoes, just breaking trail a lot. The game trails seemed to kind of go uphill versus they were trying to skirt around, and there was a few in there, but it was really, really hard going for them. And it took time, Well, once they got to that split where it continues straight, but it hooks off to the left there, the weather started changing. And, they had that opportunity at that point, according to what Michael was saying, that Courtney was like, yeah, let's just do it. We got our rain gear stuff. We got everything we need. We're here. We may not get a chance to come back. We may get caught up doing other stuff. So they decide, okay, we're going to go on up. We're going to get back up in between these mountains and just exist there and feel the energy and do what they wanted to do. Now, once they make that turn, weather comes in on them pretty fast, and that's how it happens here in Alaska. It started raining, and then the rain slowly, the ceiling just kind of came down on them to where they're pretty much socked in. Imagine just a drizzly rain that's essentially like a fog, and that's what it is. when the clouds touched the ground, and they continued on. They would stop every once in a while because they were hearing noises off in the distance, but being new to Alaska, they were just reasoning it away. It's this sound, it must be this, and I hear this animal makes this noise, and so they're explaining it away amongst each other, and they freely admit they were doing that to not freak themselves out because they knew nothing really, and they feel foolish. Trust me, they feel very foolish for just tearing out like that with just some bear spray, because their friends offered them a firearm for while they were here, and they turned it down. They saw no need. Michael was like, I'm not a hunter, I don't care for guns per se, but I won't need it. We have bear spray, and we're not going to be doing anything too crazy out here. At least that's their initial thoughts. Well, they get back up in there, and they keep going, and hats off to them for being adventurous. I get it, but they kept going even when there were certain things happening around them that maybe they should have just stopped where they were and kind of, let it go or whatever. But they make their way up, and they are on what would be the north side of Hunter's Creek, up against where the gravel meets the brush, and that's where they decided to hunker down under some alders and willows overhanging the bank, right? Because the way the rain and stuff is, it was raising the level of the creek, not enough to be danger to them because it was still multiple feet away. They weren't in no immediate danger of like getting washed out, but things were changing. So Michael said they set up their little 2-man tent, and it was just so drizzly and wet, everything was soaked, and they were just, what they wanted to do was start a fire, or at least use their stove to start drying out some of their clothes. And they were having a hard go of it at first. They didn't want that sterno burner or whatever inside the tent because of CO2 and potentially catching the thing on fire, right? So they were trying to figure out a nice medium, so they took the rain fly and extended it. Instead of clipping it to the little dome tent they had, they clipped it up onto some brush to where they had a little bit of an overhang to make a makeshift little clothesline deal to start drying out some of their clothes with this little burner. In the meantime, heat up some instant coffee. So now, according to Courtney, she was sitting there and she was just hanging up some socks or something along those lines, and trying to make a, MacGyver a little spot to hang it to where it would dry and actually catch some of the heat and not just be, wasting time. And so as she's doing this, she hears a whistle, and she said the whistle was so loud, it was sharp, crisp, very short, but it was she said it sounded like someone was in her ear doing it, just real loud, real fast. It happened real quickly, and it was coming from the opposite side of the brush where they were pushed right up on. So the opening of the tent, the little dump tent, is facing the bank where the brush is hanging down, and they got the little fly ties off to the branches, you know what I mean? And so she was startled because she was turned, basically her left shoulder was towards the opening of the tent, and her right shoulder was facing the tree. So it was right in her right ear. She said it sounded like it whistled right in her ear, and it startled her, and she kind of stumbled back. Michael at this point was digging out some stuff in his pack inside the dome tent, trying to repack some things and find some stuff, some dry clothes and whatnot. And she was startled so badly, she flopped into the tent, and it startled him, and he was like, what the hell? Because he did not hear the whistle. And he, he had been sitting there listening for all the different sounds. He was the first one to pick up on it. So Courtney found it very odd that he didn't hear what she just heard, because it startled her enough to put her into the tent, like, just from the jolt of the shock. And so he's like, no, well, I didn't hear it. And so, she's like, how could you not hear that? And so instead of arguing, he was like, he put up his hand like, hold on, let's be quiet a second. And so they're sitting there, and it happened again. And on the second one, Michael heard it. Same identical whistle, according to what Courtney said. It was very sharp, crisp, and short. It just one note, very, very sharp. And so they both look at each other like, whoa. And he's like whispering to her, I don't know how I missed the first one. Like, that's crazy that I didn't hear that first one. That is loud. He said acoustically, it you could feel the whistle, even though it was short and sharp. You felt it. You know, there was a concussiveness to it. So, according to what they said, they sat there for a minute, looking out the opening of this dome tent into the brush, and it's daytime. You know, it's the land of the midnight sun that time of year. Grant you, it wasn't solstice yet, so they had many hours before it got dark, but it wasn't going to get like pitch black dark, right? So as they're sitting there trying to assess what's happening, they start hearing movement in the brush. And so immediately, you know, Michael already had the bear spray ready to go. They had a small canister and a big canister. And from the sounds he was hearing, he grabbed the big canister and told her to stay inside, even though it's a little dome tent. You know, he said he felt foolish telling her to stay there, like somehow she was safer in this dome tent, even though there's nothing to it. It's just a thin piece of nylon. But anyway, so he gets out and he's in the process of getting on his raincoat again to walk out and examine the brush and see what's potentially making this noise. And if it's a bear, scare it off, mace it, whatever. And as he's doing so, they heard the whistle again. Now, he said just as he was just fixing the arm of his raincoat to get it on and flip the hood up, as soon as the hood was up, that's when the third whistle happened. And then the brush started shaking, like shaking real violently. Like, and it wasn't just one branch. He said it seemed like the whole brush in front of him was alive, just shaking back and forth. He said a lot of the leaves were still sprouting and coming in, and it was very dense though. The ground foliage wasn't quite what it is like now. It's pretty thick, but it's before that undergrowth really started coming in is the time of year this happened. So he had a field of view, but it was obscured by the sheer density of all the small plants and stuff, because they were just blooming. Some of them had been bloomed, and so, you know, the leaves and everything, it was a very surreal moment for him because he couldn't see anything, but yet everything seemed to be moving in front of him, just jostling back and forth, you know. And of course, with all the water falling and all that stuff, he hears Courtney squeal. Now he's 10-15 feet away. She's literally right off his right hand side. He turns to look at her, and she's looking back at him, mouthing quietly, "Get back in here, you know, get back, come back, come back." So he takes a few steps because he's weirded out, like this shouldn't be happening. All this brush is, you know, I mean, it's just shaking like crazy. He goes back over to her and squats down, and he's holding that bear spray, and he's shaking real hard. He's still got the little safety tab on there and all that. You know, he wasn't ready. I mean, plain and simple. And those were his words too. Now, he leans down to Courtney, and she said, "It's over there, it's over there." And he was like, "Is it a bear? Is it a bear or a moose?" And she just shook her head. She kept shaking her head. Now, when I asked Courtney about this particular moment, she said she didn't know what she saw. She said it looked like a man, but not a man. It looked like a mountain man, but not really, because the skin color was different. The eyes were different. It had a very wide jaw. And she said essentially when Michael stood up and was standing over and fixing his coat, that whistle happened. It caught her attention just as the brush started coming alive. And she said she saw this thing looking at her through a small little opening in all the brush. It was just like, she said, about 12 feet away, looking at her. And she said when she looked at it, fairly typical, it was like a very tan colored skin, like a buck skin, heavy wrinkles, black eyes. There was no whites to the eyes. They just looked beady and black, wide set jaw, pursed lips. It didn't show its teeth or anything like that, and she couldn't make out ears. But she said the head was kind of conical, but not really. It was just kind of, you know, just human shape basically, but much larger looking at her. She said once she made eye contact with it, that's when it was like prone on the ground almost, because from her vantage point, she's looking up at the bank. You know what I mean? And there's, you know, a couple feet difference between where the gravel of their tent is at and the bank and the trees, right? And she's looking up, basically up at this thing, and she said it almost looked like it was doing a push-up when it whistled. Then like rolled itself back almost out of her view and grabbed a couple of those branches, started shaking everything, right? And because their tent flies were tied to this tree, the whole tent was shaking as well. Now, as they're assessing what the hell, and she's explaining what I just explained to you to Michael, Michael's trying to fumble with the little safety little pull-off thing for his bear spray. And he trusts Courtney. So when she said that's what she saw, he held it. He was like, okay, that's what you saw. He was confused by it, but he wasn't going to doubt her because it was obvious she saw something. Even if he wasn't sure if she knew what she saw, he knew that she was freaked out. So he pops that safety off of there. And as he does so, he's shaking pretty hard. He said he stepped back away from under where they had that rain fly tied off so he could stand up and try to get a better vantage point. And so what he did was he wasn't sure how well the bear spray was going to work. So he shakes the canister, he just didn't know. So he shakes the canister, he turns away from the tent facing towards the creek, facing south, and gives it a little burst. Well, it so happens that the wind was blowing towards him a little more than he had realized when he did that. So the main blast went out, but the smaller particulates that kind of bloomed off of that initial spray made their way back to him and also Courtney. When that happened, they both start hacking. And so now they got a different dilemma. They're trying to catch that breath. They just got OC'd. And so they're hacking. They're like, holy crap, that stuff's powerful. And so during this little discussion about how bad it is, Courtney starts looking for these baby wipes that they bring, for bathroom use or just, a bird bath or whatever when you're out in the field. I use them myself too. They come in handy for real. But anyway, she's looking for the wipes and he squatted back down talking to her and he set the canister down. And he said when he set the canister down, he heard a grunt. And the grunt sounded like it was coming directly from behind the tent. So it startled him. He grabbed the canister again, stood up, got out, made his way out from underneath that rain fly, and stood up to look over the back side of the tent, and he saw nothing. He saw nothing. So he walked around the tent, looking back towards the bank, trying to make out if there was anything he's just not seeing because of his vantage point and his perspective. There's nothing in his line of sight. He said he comes back around and squats down and tells Courtney, I feel like we are being stalked. Courtney says the same thing. They agree that they do not want to stay there. And they don't know what to do because whatever's making the noise out in front of them is still there. They can it's not a constant of, rustling and noise making, but it's happening often enough. They know whatever it is right over there, in that general area. Courtney said she told Michael, let's go. Just let's grab our packs. The tent was separate, all that kind of stuff. Their little stove, their wet clothes, they were good without it. She had already put the lid on, a little sterno type burner, whatever. She had already put the lid on it to turn it out, shut it off or whatever. And she tells him, let's go. Let's back out of here. And we can retrieve the stuff or replace it. Either way, I don't want to be here. Michael agrees. Now, at this point in time, as they gathering their stuff, Courtney was the one gathering the stuff because remember, Michael was unpacking some stuff out of his pack looking for dry clothes. So Courtney stuffed what she wanted to stuff in there and zipped it up for him and got her own stuff. And slides the backpack over to Michael, who's standing watch, holding this bear spray, hoping that he doesn't have to use it, right? And fortunately for him, they were facing the right direction because he said the wind was at our back at this point because it was coming from the south and kind of blowing down and it was variable, but for the most part, it was blowing away from them, in the direction they were looking. Once his pack was slid over to him, he kind of squatted down, got it on, kept an eye out. He was hyper paranoid at this point. And he said he stood back up holding the canister and he noticed brown movement about 20 feet or so because from his vantage point, looking up a little bit of a rise on the bank and stuff with the brush, he was guessing it was about 20 feet. So he figured, you know what? I have nothing to lose at this point. And, you know, this bear spray is supposed to have a 15, 20 foot, you know, kind of a dispersion, you know, when it shoots out. So he points it up in that direction and lets it go. He didn't empty the whole can or anything. He just sent a nice cloud that direction. Courtney at this time, she said she was just standing up with her, getting her back fitted and connected in the front when he let that bear spray burst go. As soon as he let it go and it drifted back in through the, you know, the little undergrowth and all that stuff, he said the whole place lit up with activity. He couldn't make out what was going on. All he could see was bips and little blips of hair or whatever it was. He couldn't really make out because it was so fast and so broken and startling to him. But there was a lot of movement going on back there. And then they heard some whoops. They heard 4 consecutive whoops, and it was they said it almost sounded like a distress call kind of deal, right? So that really freaked them out. And immediately Michael grabs her arm and starts leading her back down Hunters Creek. Now, when they start getting a little bit of a distance between the tent and where they were standing and where they happened to be, they stopped and they were listening because, again, after the whoops, it kind of pretty much went quiet except for the sound of the rustling of the brush. And from what Michael said, all of a sudden he heard like stomping, bipedal stomping, coming down the riverbank just inside the brush their direction. And that's when he turned, held her hand, and they took off running. Now, understand, this isn't all just fine gravel. There's bigger boulders, smaller boulders, you know, they vary in size. And it's raining, you know, it's misty as hell. It's pretty much like a fog, a rain fog. And they're trying to retreat as fast as they can, listening to this sound off to their right as they're going, because it had caught up to them and was kind of starting to pass them. And Michael said for whatever reason he stopped, and Courtney smacked into him, and they both kind of stumbled, and Michael fell down. He said as he was getting back up, because this is all happening real fast, he said he jumped right back up but then fell right back down because he had hurt his knee and didn't realize how bad it was until he tried to put pressure on it again. So he went to the ground again, and he said he was looking up at Courtney like, oh crap, you know, this is pretty bad. I can't put weight on it. So, you know, like, you know, they're having this little discussion, and they can hear, because at this point, understand, the bank is a little taller, and so whatever's making that noise is definitely out of sight, but they can't make out exactly what it's doing or where it's at, because the elevation changes are coming down the creek. Where they were with the tent, there was just maybe a couple feet difference between the actual bank and the gravel, and when they were coming back down, that distance grew. It was about 4 foot of bank, and you know, they were having a harder time making out what was going on back there. So he's standing there hurting. He's trying to bend his knee and kind of get it to where it won't give out on him. And once he reached a point to where he could hobble, he said 20 minutes must have passed, and the noise got dead silent. But once it was silent over where they had heard the noise paralleling them out, they heard noise back up towards the direction of the tent. And at this point, they had gone enough distance to where the tent, they could make it out, you know, but there was something over by the tent, but with the mist and the way it was really hard to see. You know what I mean? Their tent was neon green, right? And the fly was black. So it stood out. The rain fly, and, you know, had neon green writing on it or whatever for whatever manufacturer. But the tent was bright, and they could make it out, but barely, with all how dense that, you know, basically the cloud was on them. They said they saw something dark moving in the mist, and it was kind of looked like it was going back and forth around their tent as they're, you know, trying to figure out what the hell to do, right? So at that point, they said they turned back around, and Mike did his best hobbling as best he could. They backtracked to where they trail marked the path they took to drop down onto the gravel part of Hunter's Creek when they were gutting through all that brush and stuff, right? They tied some trail markers to, so when they were on their way back out of there, they knew, oh, that's our trail, and they kind of basically had trail broken there already, right? So they reached that point, and when they did, he was having a hard time getting up the bank, so he was kind of quasi trying to turn and shimmy himself up because his knee was really hurting bad, right? He's still having issues with it to this day. But so he's getting himself up, and Courtney's already up top there, and she's holding the bear spray at this point, and he keeps looking. He can't stop looking back up the creek, right? And he's freaking. You know, he said he sensed something ominous was coming, and because everything was getting more and more dense with the fog and stuff, it was just adding to the terror. And I asked him, I was like, well, what kind of feeling were you just freaked out and like you would, you know, basically let that amplify because you were freaked out? Or was it something that felt projected, you know, the fear part? And he said, no, the thing that stood out to him the most was in those moments, he was scared, but he felt there was a weird kind of curiosity thing going on, and he said he doesn't know where he got that idea, but he, even though he was in fear, he felt like whatever was happening was this weird curiosity thing, and he couldn't really flesh it out. It was just something that he felt at that time. So that is what it is. And as he was getting up on the bank, just as he got himself squared and was about to stand up, they heard some more whoops, and it sounded like it was coming right back from where their tent was. And so they stood there a minute trying to figure it out, right? Now, they had their phones, they had cameras, and all that stuff, but because of the rain and stuff, they had everything stowed away in their backpacks. And so Courtney's like, hey, let's get out one of our phones, let's record some of this, so we have some kind of record of it. And so Michael's like, yeah, go ahead. And so he's letting her dig in his pack to get his phone out and power it up and all that, right? To start recording some of this stuff, because the noises that started after the whoops they heard were just, they said god awful. Like initially, like some hyenas cackling. Some of it just sounded like stuff they ain't never heard before. They couldn't even imitate it. It was just weird vocalizations, right? So she's trying to power up his phone, and it's just not turning on, even though it was fully charged when they put it in the pack, So he goes, well, turn around, let's use yours. For whatever reason, mine must be dead. I'll dig yours out, and we'll use your phone to record. So they do that, same result, the phone was dead. So they said, screw this. They started going. They wanted to try to capture some of it, but the devices weren't working, you know what I mean? And so they continued on, and he said for about an hour, they had heard movement behind them periodically that would make them stop, turn around, look, point the bear spray, nothing. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So they would continue on. And he said it was only for about the first hour, and then all that stopped. And then a little while later, they started, hearing different noises, but they could tell, oh, that must have been a ground squirrel or what have you, because it wasn't as big, it wasn't making as much noise or whatever. And as they made their way back down Hunter's Creek, little by little, as they got out of that area, they said they felt lighter. Their spirits felt more, less ominous, less oppressive kind of feeling, like they're in imminent danger. And so they got out of there without any further anything. The one thing, though, is as soon as they were almost back down to the road that leads to the lodge there, the Knik River Lodge, which is Knik River Road, just as they were getting ready to get out there, right near the road, they heard a long, drawn-out kind of scream come from back up around the corner where their campsite was, right? And that was it. And so I asked him, I was like, well, did you ever go back for your stuff? He said no. He didn't hesitate. He was like, no, we didn't go back. They had a high-end tent. They had high-end, clothing and all that. He was like, it could have, all that stuff we left could have been worth, you know, close to $600. I didn't care. He was like, I wasn't going back there. So this happened just the first few days of their trip up here, and they were going to be here a couple weeks. Well, they ended up going to Anchorage. The cost of the lodge was a bit much, and it was like less than half to stay in a place in Anchorage and didn't have a rental car. And they said they basically just played tourists around Anchorage the rest of their trip. They felt totally uncomfortable. They tried McHugh Creek, they tried Bird Point, and they said anytime they would get, you know, where there wasn't much structural, you know, like infrastructure around them, they would just get nervous and stuff. I want to thank them for sharing. They've been in contact with me for, we lost contact for a little bit just due to life circumstances, but they initially shared this with me a few months after it had happened. So it had to have been August of last year or so that they initially reached out. We talked a little bit. I told them I'd get back a hold of them, and then that didn't pan out, and then they were able to get back a hold of me, and I was able to get the finer details of what happened. Courtney said that when she had eye contact with this thing, she said that it felt very, very strange. She said that it was weird to feel drawn to a monster that she was seeing, because in those moments when she made eye contact after that whistle and stuff, before the brush started shaking, she said she felt like she wanted to stand up and go that direction. And I asked, I said, well, I have reports of trance-like feelings. And she said that that's exactly what it was. She said she was almost quasi in a trance when she was feeling this, because inside she was like, hell no, hell no. But like her motions were almost like she had to stop herself, like, what the hell, you know? So that's another intriguing thing. Anyway, I want to thank them for the time and effort to share their experience. Grant you, it could have been curiosity, because in all honesty, if they were truly aggressive, we wouldn't have heard from them. You know, everything seemed to be a curiosity thing, and kind of they left, and so things stopped. You know what I mean? But again, thank you, Michael and Courtney, for sharing that. I want to thank you guys for joining me. And if you guys would, please wish Miss Debbie a happy birthday. Her birthday is tomorrow on the 30th. Down in Indiana. Thank you for, supporting the channel and watching the videos, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.